So I'm going to talk about the primaries a little bit and the elections and what's going on. I'm sure you're a very involved group, and half of you are on one camp and the other half are in the other camp, and I won't tell you who I'm for. I just want to make sure it's a Republican in November. Then I'm going to talk about Hillary's legal situation, and I'm going to educate you so that by the time you leave this room, you will never believe another statement that comes out of the Democratic Party about Hillary's emails. Third, I'm going to talk about Muslim immigration into Europe and the United States, especially after the tragedy in Brussels. And then I'm going to talk to you about Apple a little bit. I'll update you on Iran, and then I'll tell you what I'm doing going forward. So without any further ado, let's talk about the elections. After last night, here's where things stand. Donald Trump has 739 delegates after he swept Arizona. Ted Cruz is at 465 after he crushed in Utah, and John Kasich is bringing up the rear to 143 delegates. As I'm sure you all realize, since it's announced daily, the magic number is 1,237, and you either win that by the first ballot or it becomes an open primary. I did 3 shows on this last week on KUSI. It's getting so much attention because there's so much story circulating within the Republican Party about what will happen at the convention if Donald Trump doesn't get the number. It's mathematically impossible for Kasich to get it, and it's logistically impossible for Ted Cruz to get it by the convention. The hope of both of those candidates is the convention goes open and then the delegates get released. Just real quickly, how the delegate pledges work, it depends on the state. Delegates are pledged by the people that elect them, either through the popular vote or through the caucus system in all 50 states and several territories. For example, American Samoa voted yesterday. Puerto Rico voted 2 weeks ago. Just as an aside, in Puerto Rico, they let all the felons vote, which is very bizarre.
That way the politicians can vote.
but they can't vote in the general election. They can also only vote in the primaries. If Donald Trump doesn't have 1,237 on the first ballot, by the second ballot, a very sizable percentage of those delegates get what's called released, and therefore they can vote their conscience. If he doesn't get it, or any candidate doesn't get it on the second ballot, by the third ballot, almost everybody is released. And then I call it a zoo-a-thon, because what happens is there's mass caucusing going on, where candidates and people, Ted Cruz's people will be talking to former Donald Trump delegates. Donald Trump's people will be talking to Ted Cruz's delegates, because at that point, there are no such thing as pledged delegates. Everybody's a free agent. And there hasn't been an open convention like that in the GOP since 1948. Now, what's really critical that you understand is the Republican Party is going to meet in Cleveland the week before the convention starts on July 18th and make the rules. We don't know what the rules are yet. We know what the rules have been. If you go back 6 months, Donald Trump made a speech where he said, "I will run as a Republican." And what did he say after that? "As long as you don't change the rules." And what's being rumored is what he's afraid of, is delegate releases, delegate pledge releases, and how they can maneuver within the convention. Because there's a very strong, doesn't matter who you're for, there's a very strong dump Trump movement within the GOP. That was Mitt Romney going to Salt Lake to lobby in Utah, and previous to that, lobbying in Ohio, and previous to that in Florida. As an establishment candidate for anyone but Trump. And on the other side, the Trump people feel very strongly if they get disenfranchised, they will bolt the party. They will not vote for Ted Cruz in the general. So it's extremely important for a Republican, which all of you are, that our party does not fractionalize at the convention. That whoever wins, everybody there comes out saying, "That's my candidate." Right? If not, what will happen is the Democratic nominee, whoever it is, will be the next president of the United States, I guarantee it. Now, there's 3 other things to think about. Number 1, the current polling, we talked about this at lunch, and remember this, is irrelevant regarding the general election. Let me tell you why. The Republicans have been beating the heck out of each other for 6 months. They are not beating on Hillary. right? They're running against each other. They want to get the nomination. Once someone is the preemptive or the nominee, that person, whether it's Ted Cruz or Donald Trump or John Kasich or whomever, will then turn their attention on Hillary. Here are the national polls as of right now. Who knows who wins between John Kasich and Hillary Clinton? Kasich by a landslide. Who knows who wins Ted Cruz and Hillary? Ted Cruz by a little bit. Current polling, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton? Hillary crushes Donald Trump nationally. Don't worry about it. Let me tell you why. They're irrelevant polls. Hillary has so much baggage, and I'm going to talk to you about a couple things, that when it starts getting educated in the press, so that all of the press is going to have to report upon it, here's what's going to happen. The Democrats are going to vote for her no matter what. The Republicans are not going to cross over and vote for her no matter what. The GOP doesn't make the decision. The Democratic Party doesn't make the decision. The people in the middle do. And there's so many independents or refuse to verify or refuse to state or I don't want to say who I'm for, in the middle will decide this election. They will move left or they will move right, depending what happens after the conventions in July. That's why the polls as yet don't matter. One other thing, both Ted Cruz's campaign and Donald Trump's campaign have done something very smart in the last few days. Both have appointed very, very scholarly national security advisors on Ted Cruz's side. He appointed Elliott Abrams, former Undersecretary of State, a brilliant scholar and a friend of mine. And Donald Trump appointed Dr. Walid Phares yesterday, or 2 days ago, as his foreign policy advisor, who's a very good friend of mine, who I spoke about yesterday on the news, and he made a couple comments, which I'll get to in a couple minutes, about Iran, which I thought were very smart. So, no one's accused Ted Cruz of not getting advice and not having a good staff, but everybody's accused Donald Trump of that. And when Donald Trump announced that he is starting to appoint very well-known, very highly reputable scholars in policy, smartest thing he's done in his campaign so far, because he's becoming more statesman-like, becoming more presidential, which he has to do to go get that middle, okay? So, that's where we stand in the elections. One more thing about the elections, you are going to get really, really important in June. This election is coming down to the California primary and will be decided the first week in June.
How many delegates are up for California and New York?
172.
Yeah, 172 in California. The path to the nomination for the Trump people is if he takes New York, he takes California, he takes Connecticut, I think, it's over. 1372, sorry?
Pennsylvania?
There's different ways you do the math, but
New York is 99.
yeah, so you add those up and the things that are projected to happen between now and then, if he gets 56% and so on. Ted Cruz can't do it. He has to win too many. Ted's hope is one of three things. One, Trump doesn't make it and Cruz becomes the consensus candidate. Or two, there's a dream ticket, which everyone talks about behind the scenes, of Trump and Cruz together. Or three, some catastrophe hits the Trump campaign, which nothing seems to stick to him, so I wouldn't count on that. So let's talk now about Hillary's emails. By the time I finish in about 5 minutes, you're going to know she's one of the great liars of the 20th and 21st century. But I'm going to give you a little legal education now. All key players at state and in the military and in government service must sign a very extensive NDA when they come into office, and it has to do with a non-disclosure agreement between that person and the federal government that carries civil and criminal penalties if you violate it. All right? So there's different levels of classification of secrecy in the federal government. There's classified, there's secret, there's top secret, And then there's above top secret, which is called special access program information. Several weeks ago, I had dinner with an admiral who is a very good friend of mine. We served on the fair board together. For those of you that don't know, I served 4 terms for different governors running the fair and the racetrack in Del Mar. And the admiral told me that he had seen a fairly large amount of SAP information. Remember, that's the above top secret. And he said, it's so secret, Barry, I never got it in writing. And I said, well, how did you see it? He said, well, a courier would come to me and the desk would be cleared off, so there were no pens, no paper, no recording devices, the cell phone gets locked up. I read it while he stands there. He asks me if I understand it and have I finished. And when I'm done and I say yes, he puts it back in a locked briefcase and off he goes. It is never to be reproduced. It is never to be emailed. It is never to be kept on a server. And yet, they have found so far 22 of those on her server. Now let's talk about that server. This is really important. The State Department has the most secure servers in the country. They are encrypted, meaning when transmitting or receiving information, it's going out in code, and it is behind a firewall that is supposedly impenetrable. I suppose anything can be hacked, but that's the status of it. That's the reason why employees that sign these agreements not only are told to use the official State Department server, but it's for their protection too, so no one gets the information. Now, have you heard in the press where Hillary has said in press conference after press conference after press conference the following words? Yes, there was a lot of information on my server that I had access to that I read, but it wasn't classified at the time. It was classified later. Everybody heard that? Yes. That is complete BS. Because the NDA doesn't say it has to be classified. There's a presumption in the position of Secretary of State that it's either classified because it has the stamp on it, or you should have known it was classified, or should have been classified if in error it wasn't classified. Do you get the distinction? Right? So, for her saying, I didn't know at the time, so I didn't do anything wrong, is a lie. The NDA that she signed, it's this thick, says you are deemed to have known. It should have been if it wasn't at the time it was in your possession. According to the Inspector General of the Department of State, there are 2,200 emails that have been taken off that server that are in some level of classification. And at least 24, possibly, between 12 and 24 SAP, which they can't even figure out how she got SAP on her server. Now let me talk to you about that server. Have you heard the name, I want to say it right, Brian Magliano? You're going to hear a lot about this guy. This is the guy, a Department of State IT specialist, who was assigned to Hillary Clinton when she became Secretary of State to set up her email protocols for her BlackBerry, her cell phone, her computers. She was the one that instructed him to set up a private server. Not the State Department email server, but a private server. And this guy put it together, and that server was kept in the closet of an apartment in Colorado Springs, unprotected, unencrypted, accessible off the internet. 4 countries supposedly have hacked that. North Korea, Russia, Iran, and China. Supposedly, the lives of hundreds of U.S. operatives are in jeopardy because of it, because they're operating secretly. CIA, NSA, military intelligence, overseas operatives, SEALs operating in country, and so on. The FBI is preparing the biggest indictment right now ever requested to the Department of Justice in their history against someone who worked at state. And the name on the indictment is Hillary Clinton. Supposedly, this is all rumor, it will be released to the Department of Justice by the end of May with a request for indictment. Now, it works on that level sort of like local law enforcement. The police go and arrest somebody and they make charges and they go to the district attorney who charges them officially. The police don't charge you, they arrest you, right? Well, on the federal level, the district attorney used to be Eric Holder, and now it's Loretta Lynch, who is a lifelong Democrat and a very good friend of the president, who will make the decision personally whether or not to pursue or not pursue the indictment. You get the irony here? Now, the FBI director, who is also a political appointee, is an independent, very well-respected guy who said, I will not be influenced politically. I believe him, by the way. He's going to ask for the indictment. The rumor out of the FBI is they're asking for it, and they have a dozen agents working on this, and it's going to be this thick. Now, you remember a few years ago, you know the story of General Petraeus, who was our commander in Iraq? I mean, a very, very decorated war hero. His career was destroyed over less than a dozen emails that he gave to his mistress/biographer. Hillary Clinton had 2,200, which were placed in an insecure position. And it's unclear how many have been seen by people that were not authorized to see them. Okay? So we will find out in the coming days what's going to happen, but I think what's very curious, going back to Brian Magliano, do you know what he did when he appeared before the Senate Intelligence Committee last year and they questioned him on the emails? Do you remember what he did? Under the advice of counsel, I invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination, which, God bless us, we don't have to indict ourselves. So he didn't have to testify. And they had him. And they couldn't do a thing. So the FBI went to him and they gave him immunity. And now he's testifying at the FBI privately and supposedly in front of a grand jury. And God knows what he's saying, but I wish I knew. Because the reason why you give immunity is you say, okay, you're a bad apple, but we want to know who you work for and what did that boss know. That's why they're doing it. They don't want him. He's a nobody. He worked directly for Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, and he's been talking to them for 4 weeks. 4 weeks. And if he lives, I'm very curious as to what's going to come out of that. Okay? All right, so that's Hillary Clinton. I predict, based on the rumor, that if the FBI doesn't get the indictment out of Mrs. Lynch at Department of Justice, a number of people have said they will leak the indictment to the press through anonymous sources. So the word will get out. And then it's curious to see what the liberal press will do with that. When it says, the law says it doesn't matter if it was classified. It was later classified and it was on your server in a closet in an apartment in Colorado instead of at state behind locked safes on encrypted servers that you can't even get in the building without top secret clearance. We're all clear on that? Okay, let's talk about the tragedy in Brussels. 30-something dead, 230 wounded as of now, many of them critical. The death toll will go up. What caused this?
Lack of intel.
20 years of sticking your head in the sand.
I think it's more than that. Western Europe has the most liberal open borders in the history of the modern world. And that's fine if the people that are immigrating really want to be there and they want to assimilate and they want to be part of the Belgian culture or the French culture or the German culture or the Norwegian or the Swedish. But these people aren't. And what really scares me as someone who knows, and you should know this too, have you heard about the ISIS booklet? Anybody?
Yeah.
Jay Sekulow?
No. Jay had it on his site, though. A lot of people have had it reported on their site. It's a booklet written by ISIS in Arabic that describes to the people that are emigrating into Europe and the United States how they are supposed to behave in the host country. And this booklet says things like, it's on Pam Geller's website if you want to read it. It says things like, shave your beard, change your name, speak the local language, put a crucifix around your neck, go to church, don't go to the mosque, have your meetings in nightclubs where there is loud music so you can make your plans for jihad. It's in writing. Hundreds and hundreds of these booklets have been taken off these people, and guess where they have also found these booklets? The Texas border with Mexico, where people are about to get seized by the Border Patrol and they empty their pockets, and Border Patrol picks it up in the sand. They're here now. They were in San Bernardino, and God knows where else, because we have a policy that is copying Europe. Don't let anyone tell you the United States is different. If they're not assimilating, if they don't want to become part of the culture, if they don't want to learn the language, if they want to be left alone and governed by Sharia law like in Detroit, it's just a matter of time. And we don't have the intelligence, and we're not infiltrating. Let me show you how bad it is in Europe right now. These are statistics from Sweden. There have been 5,000 incidents regarding migrants in the last several months, 600 assaults, 450 fights, hundreds of fires. The Social Democratic foreign minister declared that her country will collapse if they take in another 200,000 immigrants this year like they did last year. In comparison to the United States, that's the equivalent of us taking in 4.5 million immigrants, which is the population of Indiana every year. They don't work. They live off the dole. They get free medical, free food, free housing, and free school. And they clothe them, and basically they have their own society within the society. Everybody knows what happened in Germany on New Year's Eve in Cologne?
Yes.
Over 2,000 sexual assaults on German women perpetrated by Muslim immigrants from North Africa and Asia. The German mayor's response, Henrietta Recker, you should look her up, was to issue a booklet telling the German women that it's their fault, and from now on they must dress more appropriately and more conservatively when in public so not to incite Muslim men to attack them. And that's the German response. My prediction, and I could go through lots more, but I don't have that much time. You should sign that ATP newsletter thing going around, and I publish stuff about this and you can read about it. It's happening here, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a matter of time before we have another San Bernardino. Don't forget, when those two people were killed, the fake husband and wife, they were on their way to commit a bigger massacre than they had done at the community center before some cops just blundered into them and the shootout occurred. Let's talk about that iPhone that was found on them. You've heard the court case now that the federal government's suing Apple. The issue is when they were grabbed, there was an iPhone that was smashed, and there was 18 minutes of text messages that the government really, really wants to find out who they were reporting to and who else was involved in the cell. And this is really important intelligence. Apple said no. They said, no, I can give you the 15 reasons and all the speeches that Mr. Cook has given as the CEO of Apple, that it's privacy and it's going to unlock all the other phones and there'll be a back door and on and on and on. While I'm a big privacy nut, I think he's dead wrong, because here's what Apple could have done. Apple could have brought in the FBI and said, okay, you guys sit over there in the corner every day, and when we break this phone, you're going to come over and we're going to show you the messages. We're going to print them out for you. And then when you get all those messages, you go after those people and we're going to destroy the phone. And Apple would never have gotten the code and would have been kept secret in the laboratory in Palo Alto.
FBI would have got the code.
No, the FBI would not have given them the code.
Yeah, right.
Apple would have just given them the messages. So here's what's happened yesterday. I made a speech yesterday in Carlsbad, and I said there's some company that says they can break the phone and they'll do it for the government as a service to the United States government. I said, it's probably the Israelis. It was leaked this morning. It's an Israeli company that said they can break the phone and they will do it for the FBI. So Apple gets off the hook. We'll see if they can get into it. The bummer is it's months later. I mean, do you think the guys that they were texting have changed their phone numbers and their addresses and their names by now? Probably. It's really unfortunate that it had to take this long. And the irony is the community center that owned that mobile phone gave the FBI clearance to open that phone that afternoon. They said, it's our phone, take it. And Apple wouldn't cooperate. Okay, real quick on Iran. The Iran nuclear deal is the worst deal in the history of American foreign policy since America was founded. I can prove that to anybody. If you go on my site, I've done a lot of videos on this that have played all over the country. In fact, my educational rendition of how bad it is played on Israeli national radio in English. My Hebrew isn't that good. Educating the Israelis on how bad it is. We gave the world's leading sponsor of terrorism the biggest transfer of wealth in world history. And what did we get in return? Absolutely nothing. Anybody know who signed the Iran nuclear deal, which is called officially the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action? The UN, the United States, Western Europe, and who's on the other side? Iran. They didn't sign. You're right. There's an educated guy. Iran has never signed this deal. In fact, Ayatollah Khamenei has said he'll never sign it. And their parliament said they will never sign it. Ever. So we have an agreement with a country that we gave all this money, and you can't even imagine how many weapons this money can buy. We gave them all this money with a promise verbally, not in writing. They didn't sign it in writing, that they're going to cut back on their nuclear program, they're not going to do ballistic missile testing, they're not going to sponsor terrorism, all these things. And we got the biggest middle finger in the history of world negotiations, and we get it every week. Last week, they were doing more ballistic missile testing. The UN condemned it. The UN Security Council condemned it. The United States Senate was going to sanction Iran. And do you know who appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee? John Kerry. And he pleaded with them in open session not to sanction Iran at this time, as it would not be productive. Is that shocking to you? I have a good friend. He's the leading Democrat in the Congress. He's the leading Democrat in the Congress opposed to the Iran nuclear deal. He's gotten in several big arguments with the president about this. And I asked him, I said, what could Kerry possibly be thinking to give away the world to these thugs that are blowing up Americans and our allies in 60 countries around the world? And he said, those of us that know John Kerry believe that he's running for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he believes when he leaves as Secretary of State in 11 months, or 10 months now, this is going to be his legacy, this deal. And God bless every Republican except John Kasich, who for some reason thinks the deal ought to just be saved, for saying they'll blow it up on the first deal. It's the smartest thing Ted Cruz has ever said. It's the smartest thing Donald Trump has ever said. It is a horrible, horrible deal. And don't believe when they say, well, the money's already there, there's nothing we can do. That's BS. We control the International Bank of Settlements. We can freeze Iran's money in 20 minutes. And that economy will stop the next day if we want it bad enough. You've got a Republican Senate, you've got a Republican House, we need a Republican president, and then Iran will come back into compliance with civilization. They are fomenting war all over the world, and we are funding it. They just completed the largest purchase in history, this is Iran, of advanced Chinese fighter jets that are probably as good as our F-15 and F-16s because they were stolen from General Dynamics, some of the technology. They've bought the long-range Korean ICBM technology. They're buying anti-missile missiles from Russia. They bought the Su-22 missile system from Russia, and Israeli intelligence believes they've gotten the nuclear explosion triggers from Pakistan, but they can't prove it. And they're funding Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and groups around the world, Al-Nusra, all over Africa, Indonesia, blowing up things everywhere. And we're doing nothing. Oh, except we funded them. Okay, so that we have enough time for questions, I just wanted to leave you with one thing. So I'll tell you what I'm doing about it. That's that sign-up sheet. I founded something called American Truth Project, and the purpose is to get videos like this out, and the things we write, and the people that I talk to that I can get to talk to me. I do a lot of television stuff, both locally and nationally, and sometimes internationally. So if you want to be on the mailing list, that would be great. And if you ever want to give donations, they're tax deductible, and I send everyone a U.S. Constitution that I'll write you a little note on if you want to donate.